So, hi everybody. It's really awesome to be here. It felt like in many ways our campaign last year to take our democracy back, to take back the promise of our democracy really, because we really haven't had a democracy, and sometimes more and sometimes less, but you know, it's becoming like not at all. And we had a campaign to challenge that, and in so many ways that campaign really took off. I have to say the whole idea for the campaign was actually, came out of California, and it was the, what shall we say, the fighting spirit, the unstoppable fighting spirit of California that gave rise to our campaign. So it's great to be full circle and coming back. And I, above all, want to say a big thank you for all the energy and the excitement and the support that you provided. And many of those people who made it happen are in this room. So I just want to give you all a big thank you for the incredible work you did. So as June was saying, and thank you for that very kind introduction, June, for me this really is about practicing medicine, about the great healing that we need to undertake. And I found in so many ways that sitting in clinic and dispensing pills and medical procedures and sending people back out to the very things that were making them sick to start with, just wasn't very satisfying or effective at all, and I kept going upstream and upstream. So now when people say, what kind of medicine are you practicing? I say I'm practicing political medicine because it's the mother of all illnesses, and until we fix that one, we're just not going to fix the everyday things that are literally killing us, not only our health, our physical and medical health, but economically, socially, democratically, and environmentally, for sure, in terms of peace and human rights and international justice. All of those things really need to be fixed, and we have to work on them as issues, but we also have to work on them politically and reject this divide and conquer framework that the political system tries to force us into. It keeps trying to tell us that we have to work on one issue and work on it within establishment politics, because that's where the real power lies. Unfortunately, that is where the power lies right now. It's where the incredible economic and social power is concentrated, and we've seen how incredibly concentrated that's become, to where the image of it that I like to use, because it makes it very crystal clear. If you had 100 people representing the whole population of America in a room, and you had 100 loaves of bread that represented the wealth of the nation, one person would have how many loaves? Yeah, exactly. Well, one person would have what the other 99% has. That's true. And the way that it divides up, there are many ways to look at this, but if you looked at how that exactly sorts out, one person has 50 loaves of bread. The bottom 50 people actually have one loaf of bread. 50 people are sharing one loaf of bread right now, while the person at the top has somewhere between 40 and 50 loaves. And then the remainder is distributed largely, mostly at the top. So, this is not a system that works. And as the famous Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said a while back, we can have either a democracy or vast concentrations of wealth, and we know what we've got. We've got the latter, vast concentrations of wealth that have been getting more and more concentrated over the past, certainly 100 years, but especially over the last 40 to 50 years since the Second World War. that concentration has accelerated, and it continues to accelerate. And as it accelerates, everything else accelerates in the wrong direction too, which is why, one of the themes of our campaign is, and I say is because the campaign refuses to die. And I don't mean necessarily my candidacy, I mean the campaign that we all own. That is the campaign to take back this promise of democracy and the peaceful, just, green future we deserve, and the campaign to build a political party to do that, because the establishment parties just won't do it. So and that is the campaign that refuses to die. And I've been running for about 12 years. I've run for office, I think, 5 times. It gets hard to keep count because after a while, one campaign really blends into the other. And campaign time also begins to blend into inter-campaign times because you really realize it's all the same thing. They try to, to sort of fuzzy it up with all kinds of technical requirements and reporting and rules about how you can fundraise and the kind of committees that you have to have. But that's really just the window dressing. These fights go on and they get bigger. In many ways, the playing field gets more and more tipped against us, but at the same time, we grow much stronger. And so I've been running for 12 years, and there are Greens, I must acknowledge, who have been running many more times than that and have been doing a great job of building our parties as we run. And for me, this was the first time that people didn't care about the vote count, because when the system is rigged from the get-go, what they want you to do is judge yourself defeated because you don't reach, 50% plus 1. The system is set up to try to slap you down before you even get going, as it does in so many other ways. But the real victory is actually rejecting that psychological warfare that tells us that we are powerless, and in fact realizing that we are powerful. And that, we do have within our power to win this. And in fact, we've already won, because when you put together the numbers of people who are there in support, who are fighting for free public higher education, who are fighting to end student debt, not banker debt, let them go down with that ship. They built it, they can own it. Instead of spending $85 billion every month, which is what we are now spending, thanks to the Fed, with the blessings of the Department of Treasury and the White House, the latest bailout is $85 billion a month. You don't hear that number very much, because when we talked about the terrible sequester, which is in fact terrible, it amounted to, how much? $85 billion over a year. Somehow they can come up with $85 billion every month to keep bailing out the banks. While we couldn't come up with $85 billion over the course of a year to prevent the draconian cuts of the sequester, which were superimposed on draconian cuts before that, and there are more to come. You may have heard the news, I think it was on Friday, that the president is once again leading the charge to cut Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, you can be sure, is on the chopping block as well as part of the upcoming budget cuts. But, in fact, we are pouring trillions not only into Wall Street bailouts, but also into wars for oil and tax breaks for the wealthy. There is no shortage of money and resources. And in fact, if we just took a small portion of that, there's $85 billion that's being spent every month to bail out the big banks, and put that into bailing out the students, we would have student debt over and done with within a year. We should be doing that. And public higher education should be free. It should be tuition free, as it was intended to be and as it used to be. We know this is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the economical thing to do. After the Second World War, returning soldiers were eligible for nearly free public higher education, the so-called GI Bill, and they were crunching the numbers carefully. And Congress followed this and reported that, in fact, for every dollar that was invested, we got $7 back. So it is enormously, it's the best investment in town to actually put every young person who wants a higher education through public higher education. Whether it's 2 years or 4 years or continuing on to grad school, this is how we build the economy of the future. And it's some 37 million students now who are basically indentured servants for the get-go. And you may know these numbers as well as I do. 1 out of every 2 college students now, recent graduates who spent the money and did the work to get a college degree, is actually working in a job that does not require a college degree and therefore does not pay college wages. 1 out of every 2 college graduates is not earning what they need to earn to start paying back those student loans. So it's really just staggering. And in fact, the Department of Labor put out a study recently showing that over the next 10 years, what they expect actually are 9 out of every 10 jobs to be non-college degree, and in fact 5 out of 10 jobs not to require even a high school degree. So that means we really are entering, the slave labor economy. And it's been pretty clear. I don't know how many recent graduates are here today, but certainly people know a lot of recent graduates, and people are having a very tough time finding jobs. This nonsense about the economic recovery that they've been touting for months, was just smacked down once again by the latest unemployment figures, which they just came out on Friday. You may not have heard them because you were busy getting ready to come down here. But in fact, the number of jobs created is tiny. It was like 88,000, and you need to have about 150,000 jobs created every month just to deal with growth in the workforce. And if in fact you look at the more accurate number, it's not the unemployment rate, it's called the EPOP, which is it's the portion of the total population, the working age population, how many are actually employed. And that number has hardly budged at all. So that recovery is not happening. The point I'm making here really is that while it's a very difficult prospect from one point of view, from another point of view, we have all the cards in our hands. 37 million students, for example, who are indentured servants. 1 out of every 2 Americans who are either in poverty or low income and heading for poverty. This is the new normal. 1 out of every 3 African American men, young men who are either in jail or on probation or parole. This is the nature of the beast. And we have a climate which is absolutely unraveling before our very eyes, and a president who continues to lead the charge for all of the above as fast as he possibly can, bragging that he built more pipeline than any president before him. When in fact, if you understand the reality of climate, it's not balancing out your poisonous carbon energy with good energy. Nature doesn't read it like that. You can't feed your kid lead or arsenic or something really awful and then give them blueberries, and spinach and think that that's going to make the difference. You have to stop feeding them lead and arsenic. And the same goes for the climate. So, you know, they are begging to be replaced, and the numbers are there, in fact, to replace them. And when I realized this, it took a full campaign for me to get what was going on. When I first ran back in the year 2002, I ran for governor of Massachusetts. I entered the campaign out of desperation because nothing else was working. I had been an advocate and an activist in many different areas, and I kept looking for one area that would get traction, and it would get defeated. So then I'd look for another area that might get traction. You know, I was working on single payer, working on campaign finance reform, and we actually passed it. Public financing in Massachusetts, and the Democratic legislature turned around and repealed it on a voice vote, no less. You know, so as an activist, I kept looking in one area after another to find something, you know, where we would really get traction, and nothing worked. And at that point, I sort of had the opportunity to run, and I said, knowing nothing about what that meant, I said, well, sure, why not? You know, everything else has failed. Might as well try that. And, you know, oddly enough, that was exactly, I think, what needed to happen for us in my state, in Massachusetts, was to do exactly that. To start making a public conversation out of these conversations that we have around our kitchen tables, you know, and in our hallways, in our dorm rooms. You know, we get what's going on, and the people out in the street get what's going on. You know, it's our political system that is paid not to get what's going on. So it's time that we just break down the walls, tear open the barriers, and get in there and hijack that political system back so that it can talk about what's really important. And you already know what's really important, or you wouldn't be in this room. So it's not like you have to meet some special, technical qualifications to be able to run. You know, in order to run, you need to know what you needed to know to get into the room this morning, which is that the world is going to hell in a handbasket around us. And we've got one chance right now to fight like hell for our lives and our future. And we know that because the jobs continue to go overseas, wages continue to come down, the banks continue to get bailed out, and our environment continues to unravel. The war continues to get bigger, and the surveillance state, you know, is watching us right now. You can be sure. So, you know, this is our chance to fight like our lives depend on it, and our lives do depend on it. And, you know, to my mind, when people say, oh, it must take a lot of courage to run, you know, I say, well, actually, for me, it would take courage not to run, because I am much more afraid of what is coming down the pike, you know, of the expanding war, the surveillance state, the police state, the military and police repression, the unraveling of our climate, the meltdown of our ice sheets, the heat waves. You know, in Europe, in the early 2000s, there was a big heat wave, and about 50 or 60,000 people died with sustained temperatures of 105. Well, on the trajectory we're on, within a couple decades, we will have heat waves not of 105 degrees, but 120 degrees. And this is pretty much settled science right now. The question is whether it will happen in 2040 or will it take till 2080. We're not sure, but it's happening in your lifetime, maybe in my lifetime too. That's what I'm afraid of. You know, I'm not afraid of some press that's gonna throw hard questions at you, or political critics, or the establishment parties who will do everything they can to make you look like a fool. You know, nature is on our side, and the economy is on our side. The sooner that you have taken a stand for the kinds of things that we need to be doing for a Green New Deal, for a job at living wages for everyone who wants to work. These are the kinds of solutions that people are clamoring for. And the sooner that we stand up and put them forward as absolutely irresistible and unstoppable solutions that more than pay for themselves. We call for bringing the troops home, for downsizing the military, for taxing Wall Street in particular, which is the only economic sector that's getting off without paying a sales tax. How can that be that the most profitable sector of the economy doesn't have to pay 1 iota of a sales tax when you and me are paying on average 9 to 10% across this country of a sales tax? If you impose just a 0.5% on Wall Street of a sales tax, it would produce at least hundreds of billions of dollars every year. And that's more than enough to jumpstart the Green New Deal and create the jobs that we need. And by the way, the good news is that when we create those jobs to stop the economic emergency that we're in, to create a future for our young people and our communities, the minute we do that, we've also cured the climate problem, and we make wars for oil obsolete. And how do we do that? By incentivizing and creating the jobs in clean renewable energy, local sustainable organic agriculture, public transportation, infrastructure improvements, as well as funding the jobs we need to make our community sustainable. Teachers, nurses, child care, after school, home care, violence prevention, drug abuse prevention and rehabilitation. And while we're at it, it's time not only for the federal government to accept that marijuana has been legalized as a medication in California and Colorado and many other states around this country, but to actually eliminate the biggest problem associated with illegal marijuana, and that is the violence and the crime that comes with the black market, the underground market that is created by making marijuana illegal. So the minute you legalize marijuana, you do away with the biggest health and safety threat of all, which results from the illegality of marijuana. And we can save, untold billions of dollars every year by legalizing marijuana and create a lot of jobs. And while we're at it, legalizing hemp as well, because the potential for hemp to jumpstart local economies and manufacturing and sustainable energy production is just monumental. Hemp is one of the most diverse manufacturing substances around. And it's no surprise that it's banned, because it is a threat to the paper industry and to the plastics industry, as medical marijuana is a big threat to the pharmaceutical industry because of its incredibly powerful potential to treat pain and suffering and nausea and lack of appetite and so on that go with cancer and other serious illnesses. So this is part of creating that green economy. That's what the Green New Deal is all about. And in creating that green economy, it not only can put an end to unemployment, but it also jumpstarts that green economy that we need to actually put a halt to climate change. Now, we can't do it for the whole world, but how about we stop thwarting the rest of the world from coming to terms with climate change, which, again, we can lay at the doorstep not only of Republican administrations, but also the latest Democratic administration, which played a major role in preventing the passage of an updated climate accord in Durban, South Africa, and Copenhagen before that. And the number that they came up with which was like 17% reduction, I think, over 2005. You know, it's a pittance. It basically fades to almost zero when you look at what the science says. The science always talks in terms of 1990 carbon production. These are sort of technicalities, but you know, these are the ways that they can pull the wool over our eyes. They jigger the numbers around, so it sounds like, whoa, 17% by 2020. That must be really impressive. Well, actually, it's nothing compared to what the IPCC, the UN body on climate change, and scientific associations world over have said that you really have to markedly come down over 1990 levels, you know, which means, well, and I have to add that we now know that even that is not enough. We need to go to a zero carbon economy as quickly as humanly possible. We're now looking at the meltdown of the Arctic, for example, possibly as soon as the next 10 years. That's one of the major tipping points, because when you lose that reflective shield, it just intensifies the warming. The warming will happen faster. All the damages that we've seen, including the drought that California knows a lot about, drought, storms, fires, you know, intense weather, flooding, etc. All of those impacts have occurred with less than 1 degree centigrade of warming. But the science is in complete agreement now that we're on track for at least 4 degrees of warming this century. Some people say, and these are respected authorities, who say it'll be 4 degrees of warming by 2050. How many people plan to be here in 2050? All right, so that's a lot of us. They try to keep these, you know, impacts far enough away that you won't take them personally. But you know what? They can't do that anymore because it's happening right now. So people are mobilizing, and what is so exciting now is that the momentum we developed together during the last campaign, it lives on, and in many ways it's only grown bigger, and it is wake-up time. The Occupy movement, for example, early on, didn't really want us coming around, and if our campaign called to say we'd be coming, they'd say, oh, well, okay, but don't bring any literature, don't have buttons, and don't talk about your campaign. We said, fine, because we're really here to support you. And we did that. And after a while, they started talking about the campaign. When we would show up, and they would talk about the campaign, and they would say, I really want to get involved. Now they are very much involved, and in fact, a week from today, I believe, we'll be doing a green campaign school at the New England conference of the Occupy groups, because they have really gotten to that point where they realize they themselves are very much targeted and victims of this predatory political system. So it's not to stop doing what they're doing. We need Occupy to continue occupying our homes and occupying Sandy and occupying Bank of America and our schools and all the rest. But Occupy also needs to occupy the voting booth and to fight the battle, the electoral battles as well. Because if we only fight the fight out in the street and ignore the voting booth, then what goes on in the voting booth will basically demolish all the work that we do out in the street. So it's very exciting to see this wake-up time happening right now, and it's really across the board. I think the climate movement is in shock because after holding this, you know, this big festival that used the motto and the logo of the Obama campaign, where some of the spokespeople actually said, we got your back, Obama. You know, we're here to show you can do the right thing, which is what we know you want to do. And they refused to allow political opponents to have a voice. They had an open, an open forum for supporters of Obama, but would not allow political opponents to be heard on their roster. And that, unfortunately typified many of the events. It was like the next day we learned, how did Obama respond to 40 or 50,000 people who were asking him to do the right thing? He went to play golf with Big Oil down in Florida. I don't know if you heard about that. But, that's what you're asking for if you are so naive as to think that we can get out of here without, really fighting for it. You can't just ask nicely and think that you're going to be persuasive. And I look to Frederick Douglass, actually. I hear him in my mind every day. His amazing quote about how power concedes nothing without a demand, it never has and it never will. And that is what our role as a political party and our role as candidates is to bring that demand into the political dialogue so that we can get traction. If you don't have a demand, you can't get traction. And you don't have to win the race in order to win the day. And we've seen this, for example, the Liberty Party at the time of the abolition of slavery. The Liberty Party began to take the agenda of the abolition movement and make it political. It got absorbed by another small independent political party, which was the Republican Party, that actually went on to win a presidential race in a time of great social upheaval. Sometimes third parties do win. Or the Women's Party, which struggled to make the agenda of the women's movement and women's suffrage, the right to vote, which was a battle being fought out in the street. And women were picketing and going to jail and going on hunger strikes to move that agenda forward. And it's this combination of a social movement on the ground, which is happening all around us right now by the droves, together with an independent political movement that can drive this agenda forward. We saw it with the labor movement, with the labor parties, the socialists, the progressive, the communists, the farm worker parties, that took that agenda of the social movement, made it political, and took off the gloves and had a real fight about it. If you don't have a political fight about it, it's not happening. And our political system, I think, has, it's totally beyond repair. I think we have been there and done that for working for change within the establishment parties. And they have only dug in deeper. It's really important now because we're running out of time, the clock is ticking. It is our job, it's our responsibility to stand up and to transform this crisis that we face and turn the breaking point. We are at a breaking point for people and the planet and the economy and our democracy. This is the time to turn that breaking point into a tipping point and to take back our democracy and the peaceful, just, green future we deserve. It is within our reach. And that's why we are here today, and we are going to make it happen. And I'm delighted to be here to tell you everything I know in the course of our workshops today. Myself and others will be doing everything in our power to help build that movement here in California, because California has been leading the way in so many ways in the development of the Green Party. So I hope you'll help us go the next step. Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you. Thank you, Joan.